Most people spend more time picking a Netflix show than understanding the account that's supposed to fund the last 30 years of their life. And that's not a dig. Nobody explains this stuff in plain English. You enroll, you pick a percentage, and then you sort of just hope it works. But here's what changes when you actually understand how a 401k works under the hood. You start making decisions that are worth tens of thousands of dollars without changing your salary, without taking on any risk, just by knowing what the account is actually doing. So that's what we're doing today. First, we're going to cover how the account actually works at the mechanical level, not the textbook version. Then we'll get into the mistakes that cost most people serious money without them ever realizing it. And finally, we'll build out the exact setup you should have before you close this video. And before anything else, here's a number worth sitting with. The average 401k balance in the United States right now sits around $112,000. The average balance for someone in their 50s, which is typically when people start paying close attention, is closer to $230,000. Meanwhile, most retirement calculators say you need somewhere between $1.5 and $2 million to retire comfortably. That gap isn't going to close by accident. It closes because someone understood the rules and used them. So let's talk about what this account actually is, because the name tells you nothing. A 401k is just the tax code section that describes a specific kind of employer-sponsored retirement plan. That's it. The name is literally a paragraph number. What matters is what it does. It lets you take money out of your paycheck before the federal government taxes it, invest it, and let it grow for decades without paying taxes on the gains year after year. You only pay taxes when you pull the money out in retirement, which is typically when you're in a lower tax bracket anyway. That's the core deal. You're trading taxes today for growth that the IRS can't touch until you're 65. Here's the simplest way to feel the weight of that. Say you make $70,000 a year and you contribute 10% to your 401k. That's $7,000 a year going in. But because it's pre-tax, you're not actually losing $7,000 from your paycheck. You're losing something closer to $5,000 or $5,200, depending on your bracket, because the money goes in before the government takes its cut. So you're getting a built-in discount on every single dollar you invest. That's not a loophole. That's literally what the account was designed to do. Now, where people get lost is they think the 401k is the investment. It's not. The 401k is the container. What you put inside that container is what actually grows your money. And most plans give you a menu of funds to choose from. Typically mutual funds or index funds, sometimes target date funds. A lot of people pick something random from the list, or they pick the thing that sounds the safest, and then they never look at it again. That's one of the 2 or 3 moves that ends up costing them the most over a lifetime. We're going to get into that. There's also a version of the 401k that uses after-tax dollars instead of pre-tax dollars. It's called a Roth 401k, and a lot of employers now offer both options. With a traditional 401k, you don't pay taxes on the money going in, but you pay ordinary income tax when you pull it out in retirement. With a Roth version, it's the opposite. You contribute with money you've already paid taxes on, but everything that grows inside the account and everything you pull out in retirement is completely tax-free. For someone in their 20s or 30s who expects to be in a higher tax bracket when they retire, the Roth option can be worth a lot. For someone in their peak earning years right now who expects a lower income in retirement, the traditional pre-tax version often wins. Most people don't know they have both options sitting right inside their existing plan. If you've never checked, this is worth a 5-minute conversation with your HR department or a quick look at your enrollment portal. But first, the employer match, because this is genuinely one of the best deals in personal finance, and most people either don't fully understand it or don't take full advantage of it. Here's how it works. Your employer agrees to match a percentage of what you contribute, up to a certain limit. A common structure is something like this. Your company matches 50% of your contributions up to 6% of your salary. That means if you earn $80,000 and you contribute 6%, which is $4,800, your employer throws in another $2,400. That's a 50% return on those dollars before the market does anything. There's no investment in the world that guarantees a 50% return the moment you make it. Not one. The devastating version of this story is that roughly 20% of employees who have access to a matching 401k don't contribute enough to get the full match. They're leaving free money in their employer's pocket, sometimes thousands of dollars a year, because nobody explained this clearly. If you're not contributing at least enough to capture the full match, that's the first thing to fix. Not tomorrow, this pay period. Here's where it starts to get interesting, and also where most advice skips the important part. Inside your 401k, once you've chosen your contribution rate and captured your match, you have to decide what the money actually gets invested in. And this decision matters more than almost anything else you'll do with the account. The difference between picking a mediocre fund lineup and a solid one can be hundreds of thousands of dollars over 30 years. That's not an exaggeration. Most plans include something called a target date fund. You'll see it listed as something like Target Date 2050 or Target Date 2045. The year roughly corresponds to when you plan to retire. These funds automatically shift your investment mix as you get older, starting aggressive with mostly stocks and gradually moving toward more conservative holdings like bonds as you approach retirement. For someone who doesn't want to think about this, they're a solid default. They're not perfect, but they're a lot better than picking randomly or leaving everything in the money market fund earning next to nothing. The thing worth checking, because this is where real money gets quietly drained, is the expense ratio on whatever fund you pick. An expense ratio is the annual fee the fund charges you expressed as a percentage of your investment. Sounds tiny. A 0.8% expense ratio doesn't feel like much, but over 30 years on a growing account, that number can cost you $50, $60, sometimes over $100,000 compared to a fund with a 0.05% expense ratio that tracks the same index. The lower-cost fund doesn't have to perform better to win. It wins by losing less to fees every single year. That math compounds just like your gains do, except it's working against you. If you've got a 401k right now and you haven't looked at the expense ratios on your funds, here's something worth doing this week. Log in, pull up your fund options, find the column that says expense ratio or net expense ratio, and look at what you're actually paying. Anything above 0.5% is worth questioning. Anything at or below 0.15% is generally excellent. That one check can be worth more than a year's worth of contributions over the long run. All right, let's talk about the contribution limits, because this is where high earners especially leave a lot of tax advantage on the table. For 2025, the IRS lets you contribute up to $23,500 per year to your 401k if you're under 50. If you're 50 or older, there's a catch-up contribution that lets you put in an additional $7,500, bringing the total to $31,000. Most people aren't maxing this out, and that's fine. The math still works at lower contribution levels. But if you're making good money and you're not at least aware of that ceiling, you might be leaving one of the best tax shelters you have underused. Here's where the psychology starts to matter as much as the math. Most people set their contribution rate when they first enroll, which is often during a busy week of onboarding new hire paperwork, and they never touch it again. Your first instinct is usually whatever felt safe at the time. 3%, maybe 5%, and then life moves fast, raises come in, and because that contribution rate never auto-adjusts, your savings rate actually shrinks relative to your income. You earn more, but you're still investing the same fixed percentage you chose when you were making less. The fix is almost embarrassingly simple. Most plans let you set automatic annual increases. You can tell the system to bump your contribution rate by 1% every January. 1% of your salary. If you make $70,000, that's $700 more a year going in pre-tax. You probably won't even feel it. But over 10 years of automatic increases, you've transformed a 5% savings rate into a 15% one without ever having to think about it again. Set it once and let the system do the work. Now let's talk about the trap inside the trap, because there's a version of this account that a lot of younger employees stumble into and don't understand. The vesting schedule. Your contributions are always yours. The moment your paycheck goes in, that money belongs to you. But your employer's matching contributions might not be. Depending on your company's vesting schedule, you might have to stay at that job for 2, 3, sometimes 5 or 6 years before the employer match is fully yours to keep. Leave before that and you forfeit a portion of it. Some companies have cliff vesting, meaning you get 0 of the match if you leave before year 3 and then 100% if you stay past it. Others have graded vesting, where it unlocks gradually each year. This matters enormously if you're considering a job change. If you're 6 months from full vesting on $20,000 in employer contributions, walking away from that job right now isn't a career decision, it's a financial one. It's worth knowing the number before you make the move. There's also a thing that happens when the market drops and people panic. They see their 401k balance fall 10 or 15% during a rough quarter, and they feel like they need to do something, so they move everything into a stable value fund or a money market option because it feels safer. And it is safer in the sense that the number won't drop. But here's the problem. They usually don't move back in when the market recovers. They wait until it feels safe, which typically means after a significant portion of the recovery has already happened. So they lock in the loss by selling low and miss the rebound by buying back in late. It's one of the most expensive behavioral patterns in personal finance, and it plays out in 401k accounts during every major market downturn. The account is designed for a long time horizon. If you're 35, the money in your 401k isn't meant to be touched for 30 years. A 15% drop on a balance that won't be touched for 3 decades is not a crisis. It's a sale. The market has recovered from every single downturn in its history, not because it had to, but because over long enough periods the underlying companies keep earning money, keep growing, and the prices follow. The people who came out ahead in 2009 weren't the ones who moved to cash. They were the ones who stayed invested or kept contributing through the drop and rode the recovery back up. One of the bigger mental mistakes people make with a 401k is treating it like a savings account with an extra step. It's not. The whole point is that the money stays invested and untouched until retirement. The IRS backs this up with a 10% early withdrawal penalty on top of ordinary income taxes if you pull money out before age 59 and a half. On a $20,000 withdrawal, you could lose $6,000 or $7,000 to taxes and penalties before you ever see a dollar of it. The account isn't designed to be a backup emergency fund. It's designed to be a vault. The smarter move, if you genuinely need to access the money in an emergency, is to look at whether your plan offers a loan option. Many 401k plans let you borrow up to 50% of your vested balance or $50,000, whichever is less, and you repay it with interest back to yourself. It's not free. There are rules and risks, especially if you leave your job while the loan is outstanding. But it's a significantly better option than a hardship withdrawal if you're in a tight spot. And here's the one realistic line in all of this. The 401k is genuinely a powerful tool, but it's not magic. A 10% savings rate going into a well-chosen fund lineup will beat a 20% savings rate sitting in a money market fund almost every time, just on the power of actual investment returns over time. The account can't do anything if what's inside it isn't growing. It's also worth knowing that your 401k doesn't have to be your only retirement account. A lot of people think it's either the 401k or nothing. But if you've already captured your full employer match and you want to put away more, a Roth IRA is the natural next stop for most people. The contribution limit is $7,000 per year for 2025 if you're under 50. And the tax-free growth on top of what your 401k is already doing can be significant over time. The two accounts work together, not against each other. The 401k gets you the match and the higher contribution limit. The Roth IRA gives you tax-free withdrawals and more control over your investment options, which in most cases is a wider menu than what your employer plan offers. Let's put some real numbers on that. Imagine two people, both 30 years old, both contributing $500 a month to their 401k. Person A puts it all in a stable value fund, earning roughly 2% a year because it feels safe. Person B puts it in a broad stock index fund, averaging 7% annually. By age 65, Person A has about $315,000. Person B has around $930,000. Same contribution, same time frame. The only variable is what's inside the account. That gap, $600,000, doesn't come from working harder or earning more. It comes from understanding what the account is supposed to hold. Now, if you're closer to retirement and thinking, I don't have 35 years, the math still holds in your favor. Say you're 45 with $100,000 already saved, and you start contributing $1,500 a month for the next 20 years with a 7% average return. You'd be looking at somewhere north of $1,100,000 by 65. You're not starting from zero. You're starting from $100,000 with compounding already in your corner. Here's what the actual action plan looks like when you put all of this together. Start by finding out what your employer's full match is And make sure your contribution rate captures every dollar of it. If your employer matches up to 5%, you need to be contributing at least 5%, no exceptions. That's your floor. Then check your fund lineup and look at the expense ratios. If you're in a high-cost fund, consider switching to a low-cost index fund that tracks the S&P 500 or a total market index. Most plans have at least one. You're not trying to pick a winner. You're trying to stop paying fees that silently eat your returns every year. Then set up that automatic annual increase if your plan allows it. Even 1% per year is a lever that pays off dramatically over a decade. And finally, look up your vesting schedule. It takes 5 minutes, and it might completely change how you think about your next career move. One more thing that trips people up, and it's worth mentioning before you go do any of this: the beneficiary designation. When you open a 401k, you designate who gets the money if you die. A lot of people fill this out in their first week at a new job and never update it. Then they get married, divorced, have kids, lose a parent, and the beneficiary form still says what it said 10 years ago. This is a legal document. Whatever name is on that form gets the money, regardless of your will, regardless of your current relationship. It takes about 3 minutes to update, and it's one of those things where doing it wrong is completely irreversible. Log in, find the beneficiary section, and just confirm it says what you actually want it to say. That's it. Look, this account is genuinely one of the best financial tools the average person has access to, but only if you treat it like an active decision and not something that just runs in the background. Most people don't do the fund check. Most people don't set the auto increase. Most people don't know their vesting schedule. And most people end up at 63 wondering why their balance doesn't match the life they worked for. You already know more than most by getting to this point. The difference between knowing it and doing something about it is the only one that actually shows up in your account balance. Pull up your 401k this week, check the match, check the funds, check the expense ratios. Those 3 things alone put you in a completely different position than where most people are sitting right now. If this breakdown helped things click for you, hit subscribe. That's the only ask. Next up, if you want to go deeper, we're going to talk about what happens to your 401k when you leave a job and why the default option most people pick is quietly one of the worst ones.